Good morning, I'm Taylor Wilson, and today is Thursday, August 15th, 2024. This is The Excerpt. Today, Harris leads Trump in a number of battleground states, plus why a housing voucher program is failing many poor families, and how much in emergency savings do you really need? Vice President Kamala Harris is ahead or tied with former President Donald Trump in 6 of 7 battleground states, according to a new survey out yesterday. The latest data erases the leads Trump saw before President Joe Biden dropped out of the race last month. The Cook Political Report survey of 7 key swing states found Harris leading Trump in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Arizona, and tied with him in Georgia. Nevada is the only battleground state that Trump still leads, the poll found. Harris's lead in 3 states is within the margin of error. The findings suggest multiple paths to the 270 electoral votes needed to win the election have opened up for Harris. Biden's relative struggles in the Sun Belt states of Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, and North Carolina had forced his campaign to increasingly bank on the so-called blue wall states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Trump led Biden in 6 of the 7 battleground states and was tied with him in Wisconsin in a survey the same pollsters conducted in May. Columbia University President Manu Shafiq resigned yesterday. The decision comes after her handling of pro-Palestinian protests on campus earlier this year and nationwide debates over the Israel-Hamas war. Shafiq, a former official at the World Bank, said that the United Kingdom's foreign secretary asked her to serve in a high-ranking government role, and she will return to England. Like the now former presidents of Harvard and the University of Pennsylvania, Shafiq's testimony before Congress in April put her in a precarious position. Harvard's Claudine Gay, who stepped down in January, was just 6 months into the job, and the University of Pennsylvania's Liz McGill was president for just over a year and resigned days after Republicans summoned her and Gay to Washington last December. You can read more about the context around Shafiq's resignation with a link in today's show notes. A voucher program is supposed to help poor families rent a home, but it often fails. I spoke with USA Today reporter Lucy Tompkins to learn more. Lucy, thanks for hopping on The Excerpt today.
Thanks for having me.
So just starting with this, Lucy, what is a Section 8 voucher?
A Section 8 voucher is sort of a rare golden ticket for affordable housing. It's the largest rental assistance program that the federal government runs. It subsidizes your rent. It's for low-income renters, disabled elderly renters, and it limits how much someone has to pay each month to only 30% of their income. The program is underfunded, so it's a pretty rare thing to get, and it can take many years on a wait list to get it. But then once it does, it's really a lifeline for several million renters across the country.
Yeah, so what did this analysis out of NYU reveal about many people across the country who are losing their vouchers before they can use them?
The Furman Center at NYU looked at data from thousands of housing authorities across the country, and those are the agencies that give out vouchers. And they found that in 2022, about 45% of people who were awarded vouchers were unable to use them. People get a voucher, they have a window of time where they have to find a home and use it. And if they can't, then it expires and it goes to the next name on the list.
So, Lucy, all this begs the kind of obvious question to me. Why do authorities hand out more vouchers than they have funding for?
I found that this success rate that the researchers were looking at, how often people are able to successfully use their vouchers, that's not something that the federal government or housing agencies are really that focused on. What they're incentivized to do is to use all of their funding and make sure every voucher gets used eventually. And there's good reason for that. Any unused funding is considered a wasted opportunity to help a family in need. Housing authorities have learned that a lot of people get vouchers and can't use them. And so to make sure that they're still using all their funding, they'll give out 2 vouchers for every 1 slot that the program has, which keeps the utilization of the program high, but makes half the people who are losing their vouchers along the way invisible in this program.
You spoke with members of several households whose vouchers expired or were revoked. Just how much stress is this kind of voucher limbo putting on them?
I spoke to a handful of families and people in that situation, and they were really devastated. And some of them are stuck in difficult situations, living in a motel room, relying on GoFundMe donations, or sleeping outside. It's really difficult.
Are there any parts of the country where this program is working, and what lessons could we take from them?
There are places that stood out for positive reasons. One of those places is Boston, which surprised the researchers and surprised me because Boston is one of the most expensive housing markets in the country. It's competitive and difficult to find housing, but they have found a way around these limitations by pairing every person who gets a voucher with an organization or a service provider who helps them look for housing, find housing, negotiate with landlords, cover some of these extra costs. It helps them move in and then helps support them as they are living in their new home as much as they need. I think the lesson from there, and Seattle's done some similar things, is that it can really make a big difference when people just have some help using these vouchers.
Is that really where the conversation around solutions is right now, and what's next for this going forward?
Right now, HUD, which is the federal agency that oversees this program, is thinking about a lot of different solutions. The navigation help is definitely one of them. They're also trying to find ways to make the program more appealing to landlords. HUD also recently started looking into the idea of direct rental assistance. So instead of giving people a voucher, they're starting to look into maybe just giving tenants funding directly that they could then use to pay for a home. So that kind of cuts the landlord middleman out and could potentially streamline things. It's unclear if they're going to do that, but they're starting to look into it.
All right. Lucy Tompkins, really revealing work on this. Excellent piece. Thanks for doing it and coming on to discuss.
Thanks for having me.
The World Health Organization yesterday declared Mpox a global public health emergency. The WHO issued an emergency for Mpox for the second time in 2 years, following an outbreak of the viral infection in DR Congo that has spread to neighboring countries. Mpox can spread through close contact. The disease is usually mild, but can be fatal in rare cases. It causes flu-like symptoms and pus-filled lesions on the body. WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus said yesterday WHO had released $1.5 million in contingency funds and planned to release more in the coming days. WHO's response would require an initial $15 million, and the agency plans to appeal to donors for funding. How much do you need in emergency savings? More than you might think. I caught up with USA Today personal finance reporter Daniel DeVise for more. Daniel, thanks for hopping on today.
It's a pleasure.
So, Daniel, this new report touched on emergency savings. So I'll just ask you, how much money should folks actually have in an emergency fund?
Well, this intrigued me because Investopedia, which is a great site, very educational, came up with an actual number, and you don't see that very often. They said you need, grab your seats here, $33,100. That's the average household. That is how much they think you need to save for an emergency.
Wow. So how does this recommendation compare then, Daniel, with how much money many Americans actually have saved?
Well, I don't have that much. I don't know about you. No, in all seriousness, the typical family, the median family, has about $8,000. And that's just a snapshot of probably what was in their combined checking and savings account when some federal survey person called them. You know how if you fill out like a FAFSA form and it says how much do you have in your bank accounts? And so that could have been purposeful emergency savings or just money people happen to have sloshing around. But that's the average.
So this strikes me as a big number. How does this $33,000 and change dollar figure break down? What are the main estimated expenses?
Well, I'm going to scare you even more because it's actually a pretty conservative number. Advisors would say you should save 3 to 6 months worth of expenses, but 6 months, you need that much if you lose a job. Okay, and it covers medical care, which gets a lot more expensive if you're unemployed because you're getting into COBRA where you're paying kind of the company share of your health care. It covers car use, housing, like rent and or mortgage payments, utilities, and food, and they have it down to the dollar and cent.
So, Daniel, as you write in the piece, it appears folks' financial discomfort with savings really is rising. What do you mean here, and what do the numbers say?
I tapped another survey, which is an annual survey from Bankrate, which is very good, and it shows a really strikingly rising share of people say they're uncomfortable with how much emergency savings they have. Maybe that's because they're reading these scary articles that we write. It was only 37% in 2018 before the pandemic. And then that quotient rose to 44%, almost half in 2020. And now it's 59% of the people they surveyed this year said, I'm not comfortable with how much I have saved for emergencies. And that tells me people know they should have more saved than they do have saved.
Wow. So just really quickly picking up there in the last few years. So, Daniel, I'm sure there are some listeners thinking, maybe I really should put more focus on emergency savings. What tips do the experts offer up, Daniel, on how to do so?
I can offer my own tip. When I started it, here's what I did. Anytime I got any kind of a windfall, like a tax refund check, or in my case, I get occasional book royalty checks, anything that you're not expecting, especially if it's four figures, $1,000 or something, drop that right into your emergency savings account. If you do that, it'll build up quicker than you think. And then the more kind of slow and steady way to build it up is just to withdraw a little bit out of every paycheck, little enough that you don't really notice it, maybe $100 or something. And if you keep doing that automatically every time you get paid, it'll build up to four figures and then five figures before you know it.
All right. Good advice as always. Daniel Devise covers personal finance for USA Today. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you, sir.
Ernesto intensified into a Category 1 hurricane yesterday as it swirled north of Puerto Rico. The storm dumped rain and heavy winds and left nearly half the island without power. Ernesto could become a Category 3 hurricane by Friday before approaching Bermuda on Saturday, according to the National Hurricane Center. Though Ernesto is expected to remain offshore from the U.S. East Coast, the Hurricane Center said swells are forecast to reach the region into the weekend. In 2018, 4 female sex workers were brutally murdered in the span of 12 days in Laredo, Texas, shocking their small border community. A few hours after the last victim was murdered, an unlikely suspect was arrested, a 10-year veteran of the U.S. Customs and Border Protection. During his trial, the prosecution argued that Juan David Ortiz used his role as a Border Patrol agent to methodically stay one step ahead of the investigation all along, an argument that eventually led to his successful conviction. USA Today national correspondent Rick Jervis spent nearly 5 years reporting on this case, and he chronicles it in his new book, The Devil Behind the Badge. You can hear Rick's conversation with my colleague Dana Taylor after 4 p.m. Eastern Time on this feed. And thanks for listening to The Excerpt. You can get the podcast wherever you get your audio, and if you're on a smart speaker, just ask for The Excerpt. I'm Taylor Wilson, and I'll be back tomorrow with more of The Excerpt from USA Today.